This morning, so many in our country have focused their attention on our nation's capital and words in tribute to Senator John McCain. I wear the flag this morning. It was a gift I received at JFK in the shadow of September 11th, 2001 by a leader in the Jewish community. As we all as a nation became aware of the vulnerability physically of our country and the pride that emerged as a result of feeling that blow. Today is a different kind of blow, the loss of a remarkable leader of the American people. I don't recall any other in my lifetime senator that has been honored quite the way Senator McCain has been this week, with the culmination tomorrow in his burial. As I noted in a little message to the congregation, I had the privilege to meet Senator McCain a year ago March and to share a flight with him from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix. But before I tell you about that conversation with him, let me give you the context. A year and a half ago, I had the privilege to be a rabbinic fellow with American Jewish World Service, to go to the Dominican Republic and see the work of American Jewish World Service on behalf of human rights. The Dominican Republic is the most visited tourist island in the Caribbean. Most people who go to these extraordinary resorts where they forget their worries and their woes. In contrast, our goal was to understand what was wrong in the Dominican Republic. And it was a remarkable introduction in terms of human rights and the need for genuine concern for those from outside. We met people who were black, children of slaves, generations later, who continue to deal with discrimination of a serious kind in the Dominican Republic. We met with gays and transsexuals who have enormous added discrimination in that machismo Latino culture. And during those different kinds of visits to women in that Latino machismo culture, who often suffer at the hands of abuse in a nation where there were little resources for those women, we met with the members of the State Department in the Capitol. I hadn't gone in with a specific cause, a specific mission, and that was to meet with State Department people, to share the concerns of the people we had met on behalf of American Jewish World Service. This was not the first time American Jewish World Service had met with leaders of the State Department stationed there, career officers, and because of the work of American Jewish World Service, a number of those State Department people had taken their own care in meeting some of those people and taking on their cause. I, for the first time, understood the power of America to help those who are weak, in need of protections against governments who are often corrupt and unconcerned. And so in March, after that trip, at the beginning of the year, we were invited as part of this fellowship to Washington, D.C. to meet with leaders of the State Department, people with the portfolio for the Caribbean, people. At this point, we had no longer had any representative in terms of an ambassador in March of 2017. And as we met with different people who were leaders in the State Department, career officers, there was a sense of a low morale. It had already been announced that the State Department budget would be cut by a third. And I felt that gap between having experienced how America was looked to as an idea, but more than just an idea, how America was looked to as a defender of human rights, and the challenges with the State Department that lacked that investment. It was all new to me, which was the gift of the fellowship with American Jewish World Service, another way of appreciating the power of America. I had a 5 o'clock flight on a Thursday to come back to Orange County from Washington, and the flight would first stop in Phoenix. I was among the last to get on the plane, and I was surprised to see in front of me Senator John McCain. I had admired him. I'm a Phoenix native. And I said to him, standing in line, thinking this was my one opportunity to engage him, I said, you know, Senator McCain, I'm just coming from the State Department, where I met with a number of officers who seem a bit demoralized over the intended reduction in support for the State Department. What are your thoughts on that? And he smiled and he said, there's more than one arm of government, and funding will be decided later. We continued walking. I was right behind him as we walked through the business class, which was all full, and he kept walking, and I couldn't help but kibitz, and I said, you're back here in coach, huh? He smiled, and he kept walking and walking. He was about 3 rows from the end of the plane in the aisle, and I was 4 rows from the end of the plane opposite in the aisle. And as you know, I love to talk to remarkable people, and I wanted to talk with him. And so I kept churning a little in terms of when would be a good time to approach him. And as I looked behind me and saw him sitting there, he was reading, as the plane was taking off, a little, very little red book. And then he began to doze and doze as I began to think about what it would be to approach him. And then he woke up and began to read from his little red book. This was 4 months before he was diagnosed with his cancer. And clearly, it was only a 5 o'clock flight. He didn't have his full strength. So at a certain point, about an hour and a half into the flight, I got up, went over, and I said, Senator McCain, I'd like to interview people. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions? Looked up. The seat next to him was empty. He moved over, said, have a seat, fire away. So I said, I'm a rabbi in California, and I was just on this human rights mission to the Dominican Republic. We were just visiting with the State Department. So as to give him a little context, which also meant in my mind, I already announced that I was not a constituent on a variety of levels. And we talked for well over an hour. I will add, the conversation only ended because I saw that he was getting tired. And I said to him, I'm going to give you a break so you can rest. I want to thank you. For that entire time, he stayed totally focused on me. At one point, somebody from first class came back to kibitz with him, somebody who worked in Washington. I didn't know who the person was. He took a few moments to talk about something going on in the Senate, and then returned to his focus. During our conversation, I asked him, did you ever meet Putin? He said, I was only once in a room with him. I was giving a speech in Europe at a conference, and Putin was seated in the front row, and he just glared at me the entire time. He said, you know, Russia is only the 15th largest economy in the world. Economically, it's not that powerful. Its political influence is way out of kilter with its economic might. He shared with me how he felt that our military was weaker than it needed to be. And he said it clearly with a visceral upset with the previous administration. He said, we're at least 1,000 fighter pilots short, which was a huge number in my mind. At least 1,000 short to defend our country the way we need to be. And it was clear to me that his focus on military and the need to defend our country powerfully came out of his life experience. I said to him, why did you go to the Naval Academy, and why didn't you do that well when you were there? And he laughed, and he said, the answer is the same for both. My grandfather and my father were both admirals in the Navy. I'm John McCain III. And so, like the other two John McCains, I felt that my path had no choice, that I had to go to the Naval Academy. And so I did. But I was not very focused, because I was really unsure that it was really my choice to be there. So I didn't do well. Later, people would make comments about if I was bright enough to do the work that I wanted to do. But I always had a curiosity and a love of learning. So my low rank at the Naval Academy was not because of a lack of the desire to be a student. He was very bright. I asked him about the little red book that he was reading. It was a book of poems, war poems, written by Siegfried Sassoon. He said of the little red book that he held, it was a gift from the singer Bono, written by a soldier in World War I, poems that would lead to an anti-war movement. Bono wanted that I should read it. I smiled to think, both in terms of the kind of company that he kept, that was so diverse in terms of its role and its influence in our world, and that the only book that he was reading the entire flight was a book of poems, that he had that quality indeed of love of learning. Maya Angelou said that we forget what people say to us. We may forget what they do to us, but we never forget how they make us feel. In my conversation, I don't remember all the details, but what I do remember so profoundly is how he made me feel. He made me feel like I was the total focus of his attention. That he, Senator McCain, sitting in coach by himself, needed his rest in ways he didn't even know yet. And yet, with total humility of a stranger, engaged me as the full focus of his attention, ending the conversation only when I chose to end it. That quality of being fully present with humor, with care, stuck with me and made me his friend. When I would see him on television after his diagnosis, I would say to Linda as we watched the news, there's John, my friend. And I wrote him a couple letters afterwards. I told him a little bit about my mother. I mentioned that in the context of her yurtzeit today, Hetty of Hetty's House of Wigs. I told him that I had once interviewed Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and with a great smile he said, "Oh, he's my friend too." He said, "Did he ever tell you that story about how he put on the dress to go to Beirut in the middle of the night to do his work?" And I said, "Yeah, I know that story." And he said it with such delight. In his passing, so much more have I learned about him than I knew. It was not a conversation that I had done the preparation to have asked all the questions I would have wanted to have asked if I had done that research. When he passed the state of Israel, every leader in the state of Israel issued statements of what a dedicated friend he had been to Israel and the Jewish people. No stronger defender of Israel in the Senate throughout his career. There are many pictures I've seen since of him with his beloved friend Joe Lieberman, standing together with Israel's leaders, but more, standing at the kotel with John McCain in a white kippah, putting a kotel in reverence, in prayer, in that place. And so, a few things to read to lend the voice of John McCain to all of us. This is the book that he was reading on the plane that I would buy later and read myself. The War Poems of Siegfried Sassoon. Siegfried Sassoon, I would learn, was Jewish. His family had made their fortune in India along with the British, and he grew up in England. He was taken to World War I, where he would be injured, and then he would write this book of poetry that would lead to an anti-war movement. This poem, just one from the book, is called Aftermath. Have you forgotten yet? For the world's events have rumbled on since those gagged days, like traffic checked a while at the crossing of city ways. And the haunted gap in your mind has filled with thoughts that flow like clouds in the lit heavens of life, and you're a man reprieved to go, taking your peaceful share of time with a joy to spare. But the past is just the same, and war's bloody game. Have you forgotten yet? Look down and swear by the slain of the war that you'll never forget. Do you remember the dark months you held the sector at Mametz, the nights you watched and wired and dug and piled sandbags on parapets? Do you remember the rats and the stench of corpses rotting in front of the front-line trench, and dawn coming dirty white and chill with a hopeless rain? Do you ever stop and ask, is it all going to happen again? Do you remember that hour of din before the attack, and the anger, the blind compassion that seized and shook you then, as you peered at the doomed and haggard faces of your men? Do you remember the stretcher cases lurching back with dying eyes and lolling heads, those ashen gray, masks of the lads who once were keen and kind and gay? Have you forgotten yet? Look up and swear by the green of the spring that you'll never forget. He was tried by war, by that decision to remain in captivity rather than to be one released. Indeed, the position that he took in the Senate was one grounded in life experience that he never forgot, that war is ugly, and that honor is real, and that there is danger. His father and grandfather before him, I read in this book about his fathers, were also graduates of the Naval Academy who did very poorly, the bottom of their class. And they would both become 4-star admirals. He deeply admired his father. He was young when his grandfather died. His grandfather died just a week after the Japanese had surrendered, just 2 days after he returned to his wife of a heart attack. There was a conversation that he recounts in this book between his father and his grandfather, just as his father was starting the Naval Academy. A conversation that would be a secret in terms of what transpired till much later in Senator McCain's life. This book is about the Vietnam War and the sense of service to our nation, a service that came as a family legacy. He writes in the conclusion to this book, Faith of My Fathers, "My country had failed in Vietnam as well, but I took no comfort from its company. There is much to regret about America's failure in Vietnam. The reasons are etched in black marble on the Washington Mall. But we had believed the cause that America had asked us to serve in Vietnam was a worthy one, and millions who defended it had done so honorably. Both my confession and my resistance helped me achieve a balance in my life, a balance between my individualism and more important things. Like my father and grandfather in the Naval Academy, the men I had been honored to serve with called me to the cause, and I had tried to keep faith with them. I discovered I was dependent on others to a greater extent than I had ever realized, but that neither they nor the cause we served made any claims on my identity. On the contrary, they gave me a larger sense of myself than I had before, and I am a better man for it. We had met a power that wanted to obliterate our identities, and the cause to which we rallied was our response. We are free, bound inseparably together, and by the grace of God, and not your sufferance, we will have our freedom restored to us. Ironically, I have never felt more powerfully free, more my own man than when I was a small part of an organized resistance to the power that imprisoned me. Nothing in life is more liberating than to fight for a cause larger than yourself, something that encompasses you but is not defined by your existence alone." And now he writes of this reunion between his father and grandfather. "During their reunion aboard the Proteus in Tokyo Bay, my father and grandfather had their last conversation. Near the end of his life, my father recalled their final moment together. My father said to me, 'Son, there is no greater thing to die for the principles, for the country and the principles that you believe in.' And that was one part of the conversation that came through, and I have remembered down through the years. On that fine March day, I thought, when I was freed, about what I had done and failed to do in Vietnam, and about what my country had done and failed to do. I had seen in human virtue affirmed in the conduct of men who were ennobled by their suffering, and down through the years, I had remembered a dying man's legacy to his son, and when I needed it most, I had found my freedom abiding in it. I held on to the memory, left the bad behind, and moved on. He moved on to serve our country as a naval liaison to Congress, which then gave him a taste for politics and running for the Congress, and then running to serve as the senator from my native state of Arizona. His dying was clear. It's no easy overcoming brain cancer. He had the gift to die the way he lived, consciously, purposefully, surrounded by family and friends. His mind remarkably was intact to the very end. Written just days before he died is a short statement, his message, if you will, his ethical will to America, that I found in this week's Jewish Journal. It finds its place here because we as Jews in America are privileged because of people like Senator McCain to indeed be more free than any country in which Jews have ever lived before. This morning, before Presidents Bush and Obama would have paid tribute to Senator McCain, the two speakers were Henry Kissinger and Senator Joseph Lieberman. I invite you to rise because these are words that are his final words to us, and then to end with the singing of our national anthem. My fellow Americans, whom I have gratefully served for 60 years, and especially my fellow Arizonans, thank you for the privilege of serving you and for the rewarding life that service in uniform and a public office has allowed me to lead. I have tried to serve our country honorably. I have made mistakes, but I hope my love for America will be weighed favorably against them. I've often observed that I am the luckiest person on earth. I feel that way even now as I prepare for the end of my life. I have loved my life, all of it. I've had experiences, adventures, and friendships, even for 10 satisfying lives, and I am so thankful. Like most people, I have regrets, but I would not trade a day of my life in good or bad times for the best day of anyone else's. I owe that satisfaction to the love of my family. No man ever had a more loving wife or children he was prouder of than I am of mine. And I owe it to America to be connected to America's causes, liberty, equal justice, respect for the dignity of all people, brings happiness more sublime than life's fleeting pleasures. Our identities and sense of worth are not circumscribed but enlarged by serving good causes bigger than ourselves. Fellow Americans, that association has meant more to me than any other. I lived and died a proud American. We are citizens of the world's greatest republic, a nation of ideals, not blood and soil. We are blessed and are a blessing to humanity when we uphold and advance those ideals at home and in the world. We have helped liberate more people from tyranny and poverty than ever before in history. We have acquired great wealth and power in the process. We weaken our greatness when we confuse our patriotism with tribal rivalries that have sown resentment and hatred and violence in all corners of the globe. We weaken it when we hide behind walls rather than tear them down, when we doubt the power of our ideals rather than trust them to be the great force for change they have always been. We are 325 million opinionated, vociferous individuals. We argue and compete, and sometimes even vilify each other in our raucous public debates. But we have always had so much more in common with each other than in disagreement. If only we remember that and give each other the benefit of the presumption that we all love our country, we will get through these challenging times. We will come through them stronger than before. We always do. 10 years ago, I had the privilege to concede defeat in the election for president. I want to end my farewell to you with the heartfelt faith in Americans that I felt so powerfully that evening. I feel it powerfully still. Do not despair of our present difficulties, but believe always in the promise and greatness of America, because nothing is inevitable here. Americans never quit. We never surrender. We never hide from history. We make history. Farewell, fellow Americans. God bless you. Mark Kerner, if you'll come forward. I invite Mark Kerner forward, one, because he has a beautiful voice, but also because he dedicated his own service to the United States Air Force through SAG and as an officer of our country. And so in a moment we will sing, prefer God Bless America or what do you prefer?
I think we should sing the national anthem.
So in a moment with these final words, Mark will lead us with our flag in the singing of the national anthem. The last paragraphs. Do not despair of our present difficulties, but believe always in the promise and greatness of America, because nothing is inevitable here. Americans never quit, we never surrender, we never hide from history, we make history. Farewell, fellow Americans, John McCain wrote. God bless you, and God bless America.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming over swans and bright stars through the perilous might? For the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare of bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, we remember a great American who elevated all of us through his life of service of our great nation, who, like Moshe Rabbeinu, lived a life of humility, a life in which he was able to cross political divides and to see the shared goals of liberty and freedom that defined our country. May we remember him as an inspiration for our own service. May we remember him with greatness. May we remember him with gratitude. Amen.